Welcome back. Last time we learned from verses 1 through 5 that we were spiritually dead, not limping, not struggling, dead. But God, because of his great love, made us all alive together with Christ. Now we continue in verse 6, where Paul explains what that new life actually looks like. Paul writes that God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. You notice the verbs raised and seated? He doesn't say will raise or might seat or hopefully someday. Already done. This is called positional truth. Your earthly condition may feel messy, but your position is secure. And you might say, but I feel weighed down by life down here. And that's real. But God sees you already with Jesus, seated in the place of victory and authority. Seating is huge. In Jewish culture and in the temple, priests never sat down. There were no chairs because the work of sacrifices never finished. But Jesus sat down. Why? Because his work is finished. And Paul says you are seated with him. That means God isn't waiting for you to earn more approval. He isn't pacing the floors of heaven, hoping that your performance is going to be good. Salvation is not you on probation. You are a finished salvation. Imagine a courtroom and you're guilty, and Jesus steps in, takes your sentence, then walks you not to prison, but onto the throne. That is grace. Because what we all deserve, the wages of sin is death. We all deserve death. There is nothing that we can do except believe on what Jesus did for us. Paul says God did this so that in the coming ages he might show his immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. Ages, plural. Paul wants us to see billions of years forward. If your view of eternity feels vague or boring, Paul corrects it. Eternity is God saying, you have only begun to taste my kindness. People in this first century, especially Ephesians believers, lived under Roman oppression. They were taxed heavy. They were persecuted for not worshiping Roman gods. Surrounded by spiritual fear, Ephesus was full of idolatry and sorcery. They needed hope that God's story would outlast Rome's story. Paul says, the story ends with God pouring out wave after wave of kindness forever. God isn't reluctantly letting you into heaven. He is excited to spend eternity loving you. So now we're at the two big verses in the chapter, Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. Paul writes, for by grace you have been saved through faith. We slow down here. The heart of the gospel. Grace, or charis in Greek, means unearned generosity. Grace is God treating you with goodness, opposite of what you deserve. You weren't a good person needing guidance. You were a dead person needing resurrection. Saved, or the Greek word sozo, perfect tense, a complete rescue with ongoing results. Jesus didn't give you a second chance at life. He gave you his life. And faith, or pistis in Greek, isn't achievement. It's simply trusting Jesus is enough. Faith isn't your contribution to salvation. Faith is your confession that you have nothing to contribute. If this truth is lifting a weight off your shoulders, hit that follow button so you don't lose it, because part 3 is coming and it builds on this freedom. Paul continues, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. Christianity is unique among world religions. Every other system says do this, become better, earn favor. The gospel says you can't. Jesus already did it. Receive it. If salvation depended on your goodness, you could lose it, and you would lose it. You could brag about it. Jesus wouldn't have needed to die. But salvation is a gift. You don't pay God back for a gift. And if you try, it stops being a gift. Paul is shutting down every escape hatch for pride. Baptism doesn't save. Commandment keeping doesn't save. Being kind doesn't save. Church attendance doesn't save. I'm a good person doesn't save. Hell will be filled with good people who trusted their goodness instead of Christ. Heaven will be filled with forgiven sinners who trusted Jesus alone. Boasting dies at the cross. Why do we live differently now? Well, Paul finishes, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Workmanship, or the Greek word poiema, like poem or masterpiece. You are God's work of art. You are not who your past says you are. You are not who your mistakes say you are. You are who your Maker says you are. Created for good works, not to earn anything, but to express what God has done in you. Paul already used the word walk in verse 2. You once walked in sin, but now he says, walk in the good God prepared for you. Your identity changed, so your direction changes. Here's some examples. Encouraging someone who feels forgotten, giving generously when no one sees, showing grace online instead of sarcasm, and inviting the outcast close, sharing the hope of Christ with boldness and gentleness, not to be saved, but because we are saved. So here's the whole truth in one shot. You were dead, but God made you alive in Jesus. He already raised you. He already seated you. He already secured eternity for you. You are saved by grace, through faith, not by works. You are God's masterpiece, now walking out his plan. This is your identity right now, if you are in Christ. Follow and share this if you want more people to experience freedom in Jesus, not religion, because part 3 is going to show us how this grace destroys the walls that divide us.